seek time. The gentleman from Oklahoma, Chairman Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
First, I want to join my colleagues, and I wasn't here, unfortunately, to hear your initial statements. I had a previous engagement and got here as quickly as I could. But do you think there's anything in any of the side agreements, and it would be very speculative on your part, that would make you change your opinions about the agreement?
Well, I've got a low view of the opinion. I've got a low view of the agreement already.
And I just want to say I share your low view.
So
that's okay.
But if you look, Mr. Cole, to your point, there's been reports that there is an ability that the Iranians have negotiated, that they literally are able to make verifications by themselves. And I find that so absurd and so obtuse and so offensive, I can hardly characterize it beyond that. So that would be, I think, incredibly concerning to everybody, and it would be my hope that it would influence people that currently have a favorable view of the Iran nuclear deal. And
I ask the same question to you, Mr. Pompeo.
Yeah, it's hard to know without having seen them.
But I'd be pretty surprised if there's anything in them that would make
it would be unlikely. Having said that, the agreements do contain, we know the subject matter, at least we've been told the subject matter of the two-side agreements. One has to do with the inspection verification regime at Parchin, an important military-industrial complex 20 miles southeast of Tehran. The second one has to do with the history of the Iranian nuclear weapons program, at least the militarization of that program, the so-called PMDs. Secretary Kerry reiterated multiple times how important it was that we understood the history of that program and then allowed this to be taken care of in an agreement that the Americans couldn't see, and everyone knows how important it is that we get access to the sites like Parchin so that we can actually do what the President wanted us, right? He said we can't trust, but we must verify, and these core verification provisions are unavailable to us and to the American public. So I suspect it's not likely I would change my vote, but I do think it's important, and Corker-Cardin so states.
So would it be fair, and I ask this question to both of you, so just please answer it in any order you care to. Would it be fair to say, honestly, your concern is to make sure people that have a different opinion about this agreement actually have all the information in front of them before they make a final judgment?
Yes, that's a fair characterization.
Yes, I agree.
Let me ask you this. I mean, I know our friends, and I do this mean sincerely, on the other side are concerned that, you know, the issues we're going to put before the Congress would, you know, perhaps preclude a vote on, you know, what was effectively the Corker-Cardin final deal. Is there anything, once we go through this exercise and make our opinion known here, because I think you both make a very good point. I mean, there's clearly important agreements have been made that the American people ought to be aware of. Certainly the Congress ought to be aware of before it casts the vote. But is there anything that at a later point would preclude you from, you know, considering something like what we originally envisioned last night, which is, you know, a vote of disapproval or approval on the measure?
No, not as far as I'm concerned.
No, I agree. I'm hopeful that the documents will arrive.
So, assuming, I mean, on the basis of what you already know, I would assume you're both inclined to vote no or in support of a measure to disagree with accepting the treaty. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So you're just trying to make sure, effectively, that every member of this body has all the information that's possible to have before they cast a vote.
Yeah, that's right. I don't think this is a particularly high standard, by the way. I think full disclosure, that's, you know, to Mr. Pompeo's point, full disclosure was contemplated in Corker-Cardin. And I think everybody, you know, regardless of our political background and philosophy, we all know and celebrate disclosure and just the ability to fully engage. And, you know, to echo something that Mrs. Slaughter said a moment ago, you know, all of us recognize the important nature of this debate that we're about to have. And so I think in this context in particular, full disclosure benefits everyone, and it certainly will benefit our members.
Mr. Pompeo?
we ought to do everything we can to ensure that both the Corker-Cardin is complied with and that everyone gets a chance to see. I mean, we have members demand to see the text of renamings of post offices, for goodness sake. This is a lot more important than that, and so we ought to see the text of this agreement as well, and to date, we've not been able to do that.
We had an extensive discussion last night as to whether or not these side agreements were relevant. And my friends on the other side offered a spirited defense that, hey, these agreements we're not normally allowed to see because they're, between the International Atomic Energy Agency and the country in question. I made the point in response that could you trust the Iranians? Had they kept any of these agreements? And I think they have to be held to a higher standard here than what's normal. There's a big difference between dealing with a country like the United States, which, quite frankly, has not engaged in proliferation activity, has kept its agreement, and a country like Iran that we know has repeatedly violated these agreements. So given that, again, I want to ask you one more time. It will seem redundant, but I think it's an important point to be made. We ought to have every piece of information available, and I don't think the Iranians should be allowed to shield, what they've stipulated to the International Atomic Energy Agency. As this is how we will quote effectively allow you to conduct your verification. That's an important piece of information for every member of the Congress to know before they cast a vote. So, you agree with that statement?
I do, Mr. Cole. I mean, to just highlight, my expectations based on past Iranian behavior, my expectations of the Iranians are very, very low. And I think it would be foolhardy, it would be naive, it would be presumptuous to think that somehow they're going to change their disposition as they're interacting with the IAEA, and that somehow these negotiations become more fruitful and hopeful. So I think it's incumbent upon us, for all the obvious reasons, to make sure that the Iranians fully disclose all their information.
I agree with that. I might just add, as you were talking about that, I was looking to see if there was an exception for the president's requirement to transmit documents for things that were unimportant, or things that didn't matter, or things that were insignificant, and I don't see that in the language of Corker-Cardin. And so, regardless of the nature of these side agreements, regardless of what's in them, however unimportant one might think they were, I don't, but if someone said, hey, these are unimportant, what the president signed was a requirement to transmit all of the language, and that's simply not been done.
In this, and I think you're, again, both to be commended, because I think your effort here is largely simply to make sure that each and every member of Congress, before they cast an incredibly consequential vote, have every bit of information before them. Given that, I want to ask you particularly, Mr. Pompeo, you've got an extraordinarily impressive background, frankly, in serving your country. Could you tell us a little bit about what you did before you were in Congress?
I'm not going to tell you everything.
I don't want anything that's classified.
No, I didn't mean that.
We're not asking the witness be
Thank
under
you.
oath.
I appreciate that. So it's been a long time ago. I graduated from West Point in 1986 and then served in the Army on active duty for a little over 5 years.
Can you tell us where you graduated in your class at West Point?
I think the correct answer is I don't recall.
Probably is. I think it was
number
one or two, wasn't it?
I was a very good student. It's
Yeah,
true.
you were a very good student.
And I had a great experience for serving with amazing soldiers at the end of the Cold War. And this debate reminds me very much of that, right? We went through these debates about treaties with the Russians for an awfully long time, the then Soviet Union. We always did our best to make sure that we got the verification we needed, and we've had moderate success there. Unfortunately, in this case, we've got a deal that's not even to that level.
Well, we've been told, and I would ask you both to comment on this, that this is the strictest verification regime ever, that no other country has been subjected to this degree of scrutiny. No other agreement has been so carefully negotiated. And, well, I mean, Do you accept that statement on behalf of the administration?
No,
I'll
I think
ask you,
that's an
Mr. Rushing.
I think it's an overcharacterization, and I think the proof of that is the time duration, for example, that the Iranians have. I had an interesting experience that I'd like to share with the committee just briefly. This is about 5 years ago. I was over in Israel and was interacting with a member of their intelligence community who said an interesting thing. He said, this is to try and understand the Iranians. He goes, go home on your printer and print out a thick red line on a white piece of paper and take a look at it from a distance, and it will look like one thick, solid line. But he goes, pull it up closely and look at it, and what you'll see are tiny little pink lines that are ever so close together. And what the Iranians have mastered, they have mastered the ability to break one tiny little pink line and then step back and see what happens. And then break another line and break another line. That's past practice. We know this. We know they lied about Parchin. We know they lied about past weaponization. We know they've been lying as it relates to funding for Hamas and Hezbollah and so forth. All of those things create an environment, it creates a disposition, and it informs us that we need to be especially careful. So I don't think that the rigor has been placed where it should be, and I do think that we need to do a much better job. Most of us, I think, across the aisle are very interested in reconciling our relationship with the Iranians, but this is not the format through which we should be moving.
Representative Cole, I don't agree that these are the most intrusive. There are places where these are very intrusive. There are elements of this agreement where there are good provisions there. What happened was we let the cat out of the bag. That is, we left a back door. And the back door has two access points. One of the secret side agreements. We don't know if one of those side agreements might begin with the following words. Notwithstanding everything else we've said so far, right? That is, we are reading this agreement in the context of not knowing precisely what has been let out of the bag in either of them. And the second one is this idea that these are time limited. And that's problematic with a systemic cheater like the Iranians. And so I don't think it's the case that we have a verification regime that matches the threat.
You know, and I made this point last night, but I'll make it again. We have a number of extremely talented members on the other side that are routinely supportive of the president. And I don't mean that in any disparaging way. I mean, they philosophically line up with the president, but they have serious doubts about this agreement. And I would posit that they run enormous risk right now. They really do politically. I'm very proud of people like Nita Lowey, the ranking member on appropriations, or Elliot Engel, the ranking member on foreign relations, and on the Senate side, obviously Senator Schumer, but Robert Menendez, who's the former chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee as a Democrat, or the current ranking member, Ben Cardin. They clearly have serious doubts about this deal because they have risked serious political consequences for themselves, in my view, in making the judgment that just on the basis of what they've seen, not the things we haven't seen, just on what they've seen, they're extremely skeptical. That's a hard decision for them to make. It really is. I mean, I've been on the other side of this with President Bush, and when we were in the minority, and to do this. So, I think those people in particular deserve every opportunity to see what's in every aspect of this deal. And more profoundly than that, I think the American people deserve every opportunity to see what's in this deal. So what in the world could possibly be wrong with demanding that we see everything that's been written down? We're getting ready to make what the president, what people on both sides say this is the most consequential vote you're likely to cast in your career. What would be wrong with them having the opportunity to see everything? They might change their mind. I suspect they wouldn't, but they might, and they deserve. It's not just a question of, do Republicans deserve to know something? The American people deserve to know something. People on that are normally on the president's side of this debate deserve to know this. I mean, do you see what you're doing as something that, frankly, hopefully allows them the opportunity to see everything so they can make the fullest and best decision, because they're making courageous decisions or difficult decisions right now.
Here's the remedy. The remedy is disclosure by the White House of these documents. The remedy is the ability of the White House to pursue these and to reveal them. And then the clock can tick, the timing starts, we can have a debate up or down, and it becomes clear, and everybody has the information. And we can have reasonable people can differ on these things, as we know, and people of good faith can differ on these things. But where we should be unified is around the idea of full disclosure and all the information so that reasonable people can come to the conclusions and reflect their constituencies.
Would my colleague from Oklahoma yield?
I certainly yield, my friend.
Yeah, I have signified that I'm against this agreement. Like Mr. Pompeo, who recently went to IAEA. I visited IAEA on more than one occasion during the period of time that Iran was alleging that their enrichment process was for peaceful purposes. And obviously, over the course of time, that proved to be incorrect. I'm comfortable with my decision largely for the reason that there are protocols and that allow for as many as 200 countries, probably less than that, maybe 180 countries, to have so-called safeguard agreements. This, I believe, would be the administration's argument that the IAEA is the repository under those safeguard agreement protocols, and therefore, in this instance, it is the IAEA who will have the responsibility. And it seems to me that what happened during the course of the agreement, and I make no assertion of justification for the administration's process, but it would seem to me that what caused this annex to come into existence was the fact that Iran is going to be required under the agreement to provide to the IAEA what they did previous to the time of this agreement. What they did at Parshan, what they did at Combs, what they did at Fordo, who the scientists were.
Can I ask my
Yes.
friend a question quickly?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, don't you think that since we're, our responsibility collectively, all of us, is to represent the American people, we should have that information as well before we cast a vote?
It seems logical, but then the 180 countries who had these kinds of agreements, for example, with Libya, Sweden, South Africa, all of these countries submitted to, and all of the signatories to the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty gave forth information to the IAEA under the notion that it would be confidential. Otherwise, they may not, in some instances, have provided information. Now, look, I'm very clear about believing that Iran is totally untrustworthy. I have no question in my mind about that. But I came to my decision mindful that this IAEA protocol exists, and Mr. Pompeo and Mr. Roscom are going to have at least an opportunity to present it, but I'm sure that there are going to be members on either side who may very well question whether or not this is going to be a breach, and should the administration be able to provide the information that the IAEA. Now, I'll tell you what, I'll tell you, my friend, what really bothered me was that however long the agreement was negotiated, it would seem to me that we could have waited for that report that the IAEA is going to undertake. I might add, it isn't due until later in the year. That's how the agreement speaks. But it would seem to me that then it would have been later in the year, so that IAEA would be on the spot by saying that they verify that Iran had complied with the particulars of the agreement. That's how I came to my decision.
Well, I have enormous respect for my friend and his opinion, and frankly, he's made a difficult decision. I recognize, I do. I just want to make sure that, and which I think Mr. Roscoe and Mr. Pompeo are trying to do, that the American people have the same information available to them that the IAEA or IAEA has, so they can make a decision. And I want that for my colleagues, which I don't care which side you are on the issue. I mean, I think what you're engaged here is an effort to make sure all the information is available to frankly, every member that has to cast a vote, because we all have to live with the vote that we cast, and that the American people who ultimately make the decision, also have that. Let me ask my friends this. Do you think the administration has full access to these side agreements that they've, I mean, I've been at the briefings where we've been told, by senior administration officials, we've been briefed about that. Well, it's great to be briefed. That's not the same thing as having the documents, having the material in front of you. And again, I know I cast no aspersions on anyone here. I really don't. But this is a consequential decision, and I want to see everything. So do you think the administration has had the opportunity to see everything themselves? I mean, they've signed off on this deal. They're for the deal. But do you believe they've had the opportunity, not to, quote, be briefed, but to look at the documents themselves and come to a judgment themselves about whether or not the agreements between the International Atomic Energy Agency and the Iranian regime are indeed appropriate, are thorough, are, cover everything? And if they don't, that would concern me a great deal.
No. No, I don't believe they've had the opportunity to read these and evaluate them.
And I think you're right, Mr. Pompeo. I mean, from what I've seen, the administration talks about being briefed, but they haven't seen these things. And to me, I would want the administration, which is making the final decision on the deal, to see every single thing, because as I think we agree probably on both sides of the aisle, we're not dealing with a trustworthy negotiating partner here. And I have no book against the International Atomic Energy Agency. But I want to see it. I want my commander-in-chief. I want my, Secretary of State. I want our military officials to see everything before they make a definitive agreement. And from what you're telling me, you don't think they've had that opportunity.
I agree with that. I think based on the characterizations, the sort of parsing, the inability to engage substantively on that discussion that we've heard from administration officials make it clear that at best they've been briefed by others who have claimed to see it, but it's quite obvious that they've not been briefed in a reasonable way, nor studied the documents in a way to make assertions.
So I want to end on this point. I've taken a lot of time. The chair, as always, has been very generous here. Your effort, in my view, is to make sure that every member of Congress and all the American public see all the relevant documents before we cast a vote. I'd like to respond to that point first. Second point I'd make, though, there's nothing here that, I mean, on the basis of what you know, I would presume you both would be comfortable at some point in the future after we've made this statement and made it clear to the American people, we're getting ready to make a decision where we have not seen all the relevant documents. We have not seen them. Our administration has not seen them. The people supportive of it have not seen them. The people opposed to it have not seen it. But given that, would you have any problem if at a later date we voted, a non-approval of the agreement? Just to me, I could vote non-approval just based on the fact I hadn't seen everything. I got to tell you, I could vote non-approval enthusiastically on the basis of what I've seen. I'm not sure I would see much that would change my mind, to be fair. But I want my friends, I want the administration, which is for this deal, and I want my friends who are going to vote in support of this deal to have the opportunity to have seen every single agreement that's been reached about this. Is that a fair statement about where you're at?
It is. My only reluctance, Mr. Cole, is moving forward within the context of Corker-Cardin. I misspoke. Is it? Yeah, Corker-Cardin. My C's, I'm sorry.
Mr. Roscoe, you very seldom misspeak. I've been a long
IAEA
time.
and Corker-Cardin and all these things that sound alike. But my point is, in my opinion, the Pompeo language is essential to make the assertion that the House does not believe that the administration has complied with Corker-Cardin. That, I think, is a condition precedent for moving forward. Once that's met, and I hope that it is, by favorable reporting.
And is it fair to say, I mean, it's not only they haven't met the requirement, they themselves haven't seen this.
Right.
I mean, really what you're trying to do is just say, we want you to make sure you've seen everything
Right.
before you come out foursquare in support of this deal.
That's right.
That seems to me a pretty logical place to be. And I think the American people need to know, if we proceed without that knowledge, that they know we are proceeding without that knowledge,
right.
that we are actually going forward and voting on a deal where we've not seen significant side agreements that could affect our opinion about enforcement. And in that sense, I think, I don't see how anybody could say you're doing anything other than making sure the American people know before they leap, and making sure the administration knows before it leaps, and making sure our friends who probably have a different agreement than the three of us, or different opinion at this point than the three of us, that we want you to know every single thing there is to know. If you still think it's okay, fine, fair enough. Because you're right. I think if people of good faith can disagree on this, but people of good faith would want everybody around the table to know everything before we cast a vote this consequential. And that, it seems to me, is what you're trying to do here. Is that correct?
That's right.
Well, with that, I'll yield back. And I want to thank my friends on both sides, because I know they want to get this right, too. I actually do know my friends that will disagree with me on this vote. And I know it, and I respect them. But I want everybody to go into this with their eyes open as to every aspect of this deal. And I think what you're doing is trying to make sure that the administration knows, that the Congress knows, and most importantly, the American people know. And I think you're both to be commended for that. So thank you for your efforts. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.